Truly hope you two can live up to my logo.
That's a good logo. I don't know that I've seen that one yet. That looks pretty damn good.
Yeah. Peter from Gonna Go For It did it for me, and then Brainbug did the rest of the intro. So yeah, we proud of it. Yeah, that was anyway. So we're here with Erica and Andrew to and I the description says. Trying to figure out whether or not Nephilim 3 could have evolved. But I think this is roughly based on a conversation you had on Nephilim's channel the other day. Was that, Andrew, or is that?
Yeah, it's kind of founded on that, for lack of a better word.
Nephi is such a treasure. We're so lucky to have him in our lives.
Oh, we are. I do love
I'm sure he had some real pearls of wisdom.
Yeah, that's kind of the cosmology part of today's chat, and then we can get into phylogenetics, wherever it goes from there. I kind of want, so my plan is to kind of summarize my chat and go over what Neph should be understanding at this point, but isn't, and then we can get into phylogenetics and some of the rough. The broad methods involved in determining ancestry. So
yeah, why not? Let's do it.
All right.
Yeah, I just invited my favorite co-host, Scott Duke. So
all right,
he's to come around. He catches things. He catches things that I miss. So anyway, okay, go ahead, Andrew.
All right. So I guess well the question me and Neph were talking about was this claim that he had made a while back about entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, and its quote unquote impossibility for an infinitely old universe into the past. And I was actually looking into this claim because at the time I thought, okay, maybe there is some truth to this claim, because it does intuitively make sense, at least, that if entropy is increasing now, then it couldn't have increased forever into the past, because then it would be infinite by now, or something along those lines. And so I was looking into this, and I talked with some professors on this, and sent them some emails like, okay, are there any current ideas on this? And I found one, and I that's kind of what I want to talk about today, which is this model by Professor Paul Steinhardt and Neil Turok. Sorry, I drew a blank there for a second. And from my understanding, it's this model of cyclic cosmology, where basically the universe, for the basic model of it for the audience is the way I understand it, which I don't know if is it still based on string theory, Erica? Do you have any?
I'm so originally it had a basis in that, but this kind of newer model of it, if memory serves, I don't believe that it's quite as tied to string theory, the brain cosmology stuff. But cosmology is my thing, so But
yeah, I think that's right, but I'm like I said, I'm not entirely sure, so I'm just gonna go. If everyone's okay with it, along the lines of the original model, because that's the one I understand, or vaguely understand.
Yeah, string theory, superstring theory, and M theory for
Right.
brain cosmology.
Is this Penrose's cyclic cosmology?
No, this is a different model by Steinhardt and Turok in 2001, I believe, or 2001.
You got a link for us for the?
I don't have the original paper, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, so
Sorry.
So give me the names again, and I'll look it up.
Paul Steinhardt and Neil Turok. You'll have to translate some things, Erica, because my voice is still a bit iffy here and there. Oh, hey, Scott.
Hey. Well, this is what I call impromptu.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Scott.
That's all right. I was just watching a cartoon I'm way too old to watch.
No, cartoons are for everyone.
Yep.
I did not mean to dampen the room, the energy in the room.
Please,
Okay.
not a worry.
Yeah, not at all.
I was
afraid. Oh, sorry.
I was afraid to do a stream without you, Scott.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
You're feeling a little dependent.
Feeling insecure.
You're a second brain, Scott.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll try to keep this boat sailing on smooth waters.
Thank you.
We can trust you, Scott.
All
right, continue, Andrew. Continue with our summary here.
Okay. So from memory, from what I understand, the model, the cyclic, I'm just going to call it the cyclic model for lack of a better description. So the cyclic model proposes that rather than three spatial dimensions and one temporal dimension, so 4 dimensions altogether, there are actually, at least the original model, there are 11 dimensions, so 10 of space, 1 of time. And according to this model, the actual true nature of reality is described by these membranes, or just brains. And they are 3-dimensional constructs based on I knew he was going to say that.
Yeah.
Based on string theory and M theory, and they're basically like, it's hard to imagine, but they're like, I believe it is like a very tiny distance apart from one another in this higher along a higher dimension, or a higher spatial dimension. So it's kind of right next to us, but we don't experience it because of these higher dimensions, which is crazy to think about. But anyways, so according to the original proposal, so the universe is expanding under dark energy, and these brains, once matter and energy throughout the universe is expanded and diluted away to practically zero, the attractive force between the brains kicks in, and the brains kind of collide, and not merge, but like inject kinetic energy into each other, and that's what becomes the new matter and energy in our local horizon, or our observable universe. And so what this gets into, the second law of thermodynamics, is basically, in cosmology, the total entropy is not what matters the most. It's rather the entropy per unit volume that you can assign to a given volume, and that's called the entropy density. And what this model takes care of is basically, oh, yep, that's the book. What this model takes care of is basically the universe expands a lot and contracts by only a little bit, then expands a lot, contracts only a little bit, so on and so forth. So on average, the entirety is expanding. It's increasing in volume.
Expanding out and then crunching a little, and then expanding out and then crunching a little bit. And all of that heat that, because the whole reason the cyclic universe, or the oscillatory universe, was booted in the first place, or at least considered to be unlikely under the given conditions of physics that we understand, is because of the second law of thermodynamics, right? That entropy must always increase on the wholesale system. So it's like, that was the problem with it. But with this idea, with this implementation of brains, or like the if memory serves, the collection of various brains is like, it's like the bulk, and it's some kind of like higher level of hyperspace or whatever. And it's all very theoretical. It's all
right. Yeah, we have to admit this is theoretical at this point.
Yeah, it's but once you get into the lifespan of the universe, whether you're talking an inevitable heat death or something oscillatory, you're inevitably going to get into theoretical stuff, particularly because there's no way we're accounting for all of the variables that are likely at play in determining what the true fate of the universe is, so to speak.
Well, you would agree, for instance, that like Neff is claiming, going back to what Neff said, Neff was claiming that this is impossible. That's a claim of impossibility. Now we have these models, which are still theoretical. They're still being worked on and tweaked here and there. And like you said, it's not exactly the same as the original proposal today. But since we have these models and they are mathematically possible, so that kind of doesn't that kind of diminish or at least refute that claim of impossibility?
No, it completely does. I mean, that's the whole point, is that the cyclic universe, because of brain cosmology, is technically back on the table. And while I don't understand the details of it, there's been some recent work. I think I mentioned this in the chat the other day on like Hawking points that suggests that we've maybe got a little bit more support for this than we previously had. Now, I think that the reigning idea is still eventual heat death. I think that's
and cosmic inflation.
Right, exactly. But there's some interesting stuff going on there, because we've got the what is it called, the Hubble tension, where our measurements aren't exactly matching up the way that they should. So, and who knows how that's going to resolve? It's going to be very interesting. But I find this really weird coming from Nephi. Like, I find it very weird that Nephi, of all people, is having a problem with this idea of something that's semi-cyclic, because he thinks that it's eternal, right? He thinks you die and you go someplace for eternity, and then that's that. You live in paradise for eternity. And unless you're continuing to like punt out matter from the center of the universe, then eventually everything's going to dissipate to such an even level, heat and energy wise, that you won't have anything. He's just taking the heat death side, because he's not supporting it with the new model for eternity, but everything is fine. Like, he's in like a higher dimension or something. I don't know.
Well, like the way he describes it is like according to him, there has to be some provider of infinite energy, and of course to him that's God. So that's where he throws God into the picture.
Yeah, it's turtles all the way down, because then the question comes, okay, well, who's providing the energy to that entity, or what is providing energy to that entity?
This kind of gets into the cosmological argument, right?
Right, you're going to break physics eventually if you do the provider. The creations need a creator. That is, like, you're gonna go up that level, and you can take it up that scale as high as you want to go. Eventually, you're going to break the system. And you're going to have to have a what is ultimate or something like that, which is unempirical and not even.
There's an interesting fallacy here, and that is that whatever is local, our universe. Consider our universe, and then consider the cosmos. The universe is something we know about, and something we know about locally, and we can only see so far out. We're not entirely sure what in the hell is out there at the boundaries where light has not been able to get to us yet, right? So we don't know, for instance, if the same physical laws would apply over the entire cosmos. In fact, they probably can't or won't and don't. So we have a locality where these physical laws hold, and we don't even know if they hold out at the edges. And now with dark matter and a few other things, we don't even know if they hold, if we aren't embedded in some higher dimension. And the higher dimension thing is kind of hard to grasp unless you consider that, at the Big Bang, there was the space and time itself basically expand. So we're talking about time itself, along with space, as having possibly not been here, or been embedded in some higher dimensionality, right? So we're the kind of beings. Good.
I'm sorry. It depends on kind of your model too, because you know, I alluded to those Sabine Hossenfelder. Her
Yeah, they're
her
in
two,
the description, by the way.
her two videos about higher dimensions. Basically, those higher dimensions you actually should think of as teeny tiny rolled up tubes of pasta. So it's not like they're the opening to an alternate dimension where, you know, Superman is evil and Batman is girl, or, you know, or whatever. It's part of this universe, and it's teeny tiny, and it really has no influence.
Or it's not teeny tiny, and it's just that we are the kind of beings that can only apprehend the four dimensions of space and time.
That's true, but now I'm going to have to go take some Advil.
Yeah. You get into this really interesting idea where it's like, okay, you know, if there is such a thing as a being capable of occupying only one or two or, you know, three dimensions, right? They perceive us? Could we perceive that? We clearly can't perceive them, at least not at present. So if what Speed is saying is indeed the case, and that there are higher orders of dimensionality, right? Like we certainly can't perceive them at present, and we don't know if they can perceive them, or if they can perceive us rather. But that direction seems to be one way, or like you seem to almost be constrained within your own dimensions, so to speak. I mean, that's all very speculative. It's just kind of like a thought game, right?
Right.
And the thing is that no matter how, the only way we're going to understand this or apprehend this greater reality is through mathematics. And when you get to mathematics like string theory, the problem is that there are a lot of different ways to go. But one of those ways to go is going to create a unification model that's going to make sense out of this. And we're going to get some idea of what our universe is embedded in this greater cosmology. And this greater cosmology is going to be something that no one is going to be able to wrap their head around, just like we can't wrap our heads around being inside of more and more dimensions, like in some sort of 11-dimensional geometry.
Well,
and there are all sorts of...
Go ahead. Go ahead, Speed. Go ahead.
I forgot.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, it seems very interesting to me that it's like we occupy this very particular position in kind of like the hierarchy of understanding. And that it's like the really, really big stuff is hard to wrap our heads around. And the really, really small stuff is also equally hard to wrap our heads around. So there's almost got to be like, it wouldn't surprise, this is how I should phrase it, because this is not at all my area of expertise, but I would imagine that there has to be a unifying principle that kind of applies to the very small and the very big as well. Because they almost seem to mimic each other in strange ways.
Right.
And, you know, who's to say how that's all going to hash out? I mean, someone much smarter than me is going to have to kind of get to it. But
I think
we just crawled out of the trees not so long ago. We've done pretty good, you know, as far as
we're doing all right. We're doing okay.
We'll do better. We're doing okay.
Yeah, I would just say that if we are going to have to use mathematics, I still think we have to, we can't miss the bigger picture that this map has to be based, or it has to be tied to observation, because otherwise it could be any kind of map.
Well, what we're going to end up with is it's not going to be tied so much to observation that it is going to hash out and allow us to model what we have now. So if it's a greater model and it allows us to model this universe, right? And our laws of physics, and it combines gravity with quantum mechanics, and we have a unification theory, then we've got a theory that we can start to speculate about. But what we're going to end up with is not going to be something pleasing like we're a universe inside of something bigger. It's going to be even weirder than that. And we're not going to be able to comprehend it because we are tool making apes, right?
We can't even comprehend the brief period of time that we've been occupying. Like, we can't even wrap our brains around deep time, let alone, you know, you get into some of that weird spatial temporal stuff, and then you're like, wow, you know, I mean, I try to wrap my brain around to like the some of the concepts behind the expansion of the universe. What's it expanding into? Well, you can't really ask that question. That's not that's not a real question you can ask. But then I can't wrap my brain around what the question is, right? Like, it's very
I was watching a geology video yesterday by Nick Zentner, and he was walking on all these big hills in Washington, and you could see out forever, and there were all these trees and dead trees and plant debris and all of that stuff that were on that hill. And he was talking about rocks that were like 48 million years old, I think. And then I was watching the volcano, which is creating new rock, the one in Iceland. And it just hit me that all of that plant material is going to keep compressing. And I got a feel for millions of years. And at the same time, I got this sort of doom feeling for how unlikely it is that we're going to be around.
Yeah.
I mean, and how little we have been around.
The interesting thing is, I think it's going to be very difficult to kill off all of humanity in one fell swoop. Like, I don't think it's going to be one thing that is our doom. It's going to be a lot of different things over a longer period of time. But I'm hopeful. I have a hope that I'm clinging to, white knuckling it, if you will. That we'll figure this whole climate change thing out and maybe make it better. I see.
But just genetically, we're not going to be the same. We're going to be something else,
Oh yeah.
And people will be walking around, instead of saying, we used to be fish, or apes, will be saying, we used to be human beings.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, and
we're still human beings, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting bit. It makes it even stranger when you realize that as we continue to advance, we gain a greater command of our own genetics, our own genetic makeup. So we might
fundamentalists going. There'll still be fundamentalists going. My grandpappy weren't no human.
Yep, as always.
There you go.
Yeah, then they'll be saying, "Don't you know the Earth? Don't you know the Earth is only 12,000 years old?" Like.
Yeah. Oh, and I want to plug our the cell papers that we're reading. We're reading a couple papers by Nicholson that are about how bad the analogy of a machine is for a cell, a machine or a computer. And that is another thing we have a very hard time getting our heads around, is really understanding what is actually going on inside of a cell. Because for one thing, the molecules, if we were shrunk down so we could see them, would be zipping by us, at about 50,000 miles an hour. And bouncing off each other, and it's like a thick soup of, and at that level, you don't see molecules. They're not little balls. They're not actually little balls or fields. So it's very difficult to wrap our minds around anything that doesn't involve making cups out of clay and, fashioning tables and stuff like that. So we have to understand our own limitations and try to expand our minds to the point where we can envision something really different, really strange. And when I heard Neff talking to you about that, how that idea that, okay, if the universe is infinite, it goes all the way back, it'd be like dominoes, and the dominoes would never be able to get here. Well, that is just such a naive way to think about physics. Because for one thing, we are here.
Here's the real grand question. Why did you go on Neff's channel? Like, there you go. That's the biggest question I've got.
Let's go.
This is an intervention, Andrew.
We all got together before, and this is your intervention, Andrew.
Man.
You want to know the real reason?
What?
I went on there, and I wanted to show the audience that his claim was bunk. That's the reason I went on there. I didn't want to have a rational chat with him. I didn't want to have it might have turned out that way. I don't really care at this point, but I wanted to go on there and show, okay, there are flaws in your argument. And if you don't correct this, I'm gonna keep pushing you on this.
Right.
And I'm not gonna make you get over this, because I'm gonna start playing this game. So.
Yeah, you're our front runner, our scout, that goes into the enemy camp every night. We appreciate you more than you know. So,
man,
thanks.
Yeah, you're taking
better you than me.
You're taking a lot of hits. You're taking a lot of hits, Engage. Like, that's just it's not good. It's not good for your mental well-being to engage with Nephi. It's not
Yeah,
good.
maybe.
He's like talking to a brick wall.
Yeah. All right. I want to ask something, Erica. Based kind of going back to the original chat, if that's okay. So that way we don't kind of go off topic. So we mentioned the cyclic picture. And of course, like you said, that's one model. It's a theoretical model. But like, we also have to keep in mind that there are models, however unintuitive they might be, where time actually doesn't start, but like it kind of ends at the Big Bang, rather, because you're going back in time and you kind of hit a boundary, basically, and like asking what's before that. Well, this kind of gets into the cosmological argument again, like what's before that. Well, in order for like they ask, okay, what caused the universe? Well, according to these models, in order for something to be caused, it has to be located in time, basically. Yep. And of course, the Big Bang singularity isn't located in time per se. It's kind of a wall to time. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that first.
I think that's accurate. I mean, I think a cause implies a temporal timeline, right? There is a before an act and then an after, right? So if you're talking of if the infinite universe is indeed something that we're considering, then you don't have that cause. It always is. And when time begins, so to speak, that's not even like, it's not even a proper way to really try and describe it. So you would be correct. It's not. And Neff is wanting to take a concept that can abjectly not be reduced to terms that he wants it to be reduced to, and argue with it in that area, right?
Leo points out that it's asking the question, what is north of the North Pole?
Right. Yeah. That's a common way to describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think at the end of the day, I think a good way to wrap this up and go into phylogenetics, if that's okay, would be it may be cyclical, it may be infinite inflation, for instance, and it may be a vacuum potential, and then poof, our universe for in a simplistic way, yeah. But at the end of the day, we don't know, and we're trying to figure it out. And these darn creationists are stopping our progress. Well, in at least in the YouTube community, I should say.
Well, the thing is, these guys cannot stand the concept of an open question. I mean, and they are not satisfied with we don't know, but we're working on it. And you know, there is this interesting connection that guys like Neff will try to make, which is that because we don't have a surefire answer, creationism is still on the table. But the problem is, just because we don't have the details of the nature of the universe worked out, doesn't mean that we can't preclude certain scenarios. And young Earth creationism is one of those scenarios that we can definitively, with our understanding of physics in our local area, preclude.
I mean, there was a place that had little videos that just point by point points out how creationism is precluded. Can you think of a place where we have these little videos about that?
I don't know. You might call them bite-sized busts, and you might be able to find them.
Maybe that's a great name for it.
If you're interested. We're doing this week's bite-sized bust, by the way, is on proboscideans, so elephants. It's gonna be really fun. It's gonna be fun.
Oh, have you talked to Walker about this?
Yep.
Are you working with Walker? Okay.
Yep. The Twitter chat has been booming. In fact, I actually asked everyone. I was like, so does anyone know off the top of their head? Because I just started scripting it this afternoon. I was like, where do they separate the proboscideans? And they were like, they don't. The order Proboscidea is the kind. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? the order Proboscidea is the kind? Okay, we'll need to have a discussion about that then.
Yep.
It doesn't work. That's the spoiler, is that it doesn't work.
No, it works.
You either have too many damn elephants on the ark by orders of magnitude, or you're getting new species every generation or more. It's bonkers. Anyways, I digress.
So
come learn more on Thursday.
Yep. Responding to something you said, Erica. I think it's a good way to put it. Would you agree? Would be science isn't so much coming up with explanation and then precluding all others and so on and so forth. It's more coming up with the best explanation that explains the majority of the available evidence to the best degree. And of course, people will get into, well, what's best in this case, but the fact is evolution explains most of the data. Creation, you could say it explains some of the data, but not nearly as much as secular models. So it's not equally likely.
We're talking a fraction of a fraction, and creation doesn't explain that data. What it does is it is agnostic to it. So there are aspects of our world that don't necessarily preclude creationism, and it is a very small pool. The whole reason that I have bite-sized busts is because any field you look, you can pick the most minute field of study. You can take entomology and look specifically at speciation of coleopterans, and you can be like, oops, this precludes young Earth creationism because there's too damn many species. So I would even hesitate to say I would actually
right. Yeah, I say explain in quotation marks in a broad sense. I was kind of referring to here's X observation. This is consistent with our model, therefore it explains it. That's what I meant.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that when you were saying what is good, I would push on that and say, we're trying to find models that explain existing data and can make predictions about the future that are accurate, or at least within the realm of accuracy. So when we come up with like a model for the cosmos, it's got to be something that can explain what we currently see, the remnants of, supernovas and how stars form and all that kind of stuff. And it's got to be capable of making predictions about the future that are accurate. Because that's you hear this a lot these days. Oh, the creationists, look at all the predictions that they're making. Show me an accurate one. That'd be great. I'd be really glad to see one of those. So I would say that there are certainly competing models of cosmology to a degree, and but it's less the bigger questions in the sense of is the universe old, and it's more the minutia of how does the universe behave and why does it behave this way.
Accuracy is a good way to phrase it, because I think, and probably a lot of people would disagree with this, philosophers of science, but the way I kind of look at it in a very practical way, and I think of science as looking for models that work and explain the data accurately. And to some degree, I feel like that works, at least in a general sense.
Yeah, I think it does. I think you got to include those predictions about the future, though, because that applicability is so key for inputting data and getting a reasonable output.
Right. Yeah. Testability is part of it too.
Right. And there's people who are into the whole falsification stuff, and then there's people that aren't. It's fun to toy around with and discuss. I think you could make a decent case kind of for both. I tend to be like, okay, if you're going to propose something as an idea in science, it's always good to have it's falsifiable.
How would you know if you're wrong?
Yeah, I think that's really key for large scale ideas, certainly. Especially things that you're testing. Ambiguous results are like the bane of any experiment.
Right. So. It's a good hallmark, but it shouldn't be every minute part of science, basically.
Yeah. I don't think you necessarily need to be overzealous about it. That's kind of vague, but I don't like getting into the weeds on that one. I always like
So should we get into some phylogenetics then?
Yeah, why not? Yep.
So I guess, okay, here's kind of a random question. So for people who don't notice, there are different methods for constructing trees based on conflicting data. I don't know if that's a good way to put it, but basically when when characters and you don't know which is the correct hypothesis, aka tree, and you're fine. Some characters, of course, are naturally going to conflict with each other because it's phylogenetics is objective, but in some ways it's also subjective, if I want to call it that. What is there a better way to phrase it?
I mean, I think phylogenetics, the more data that you're pulling from, like the more data you're including in your model for coming up with the tree, the more objective it's going to be. I mean, certainly there is an aspect of interpretation that I suppose could add a subjectivity to it. But for instance, if I could get the full genome of every organism on the planet and then run it through, run a model on that tree and see what that output is, I would say that's going to be a pretty objective means of telling who's most closely related to who.
And in a sense, we kind of have done a big portion of that, and we've gotten the same answer, or pretty much a very similar answer, right?
Oh yeah, I mean there are issues that come into play sometimes with like incomplete lineage sorting, or like convergent evolution can be kind of a fun one. But usually, I would propose that it's quite rare that you're going to run into something convergent that once you get into the weeds on the genetics, it isn't very clear. So like the Gulo breakage is the one that I like to use a lot for this. Because it's like this is the breakage in the ability to synthesize vitamin C neuron, to put it very broadly. And primates and guinea pigs both have it, and a couple of passerines, I think, so a couple of birds. So we're unable to synthesize our own vitamin C. We have to consume it in our diet. Right. And a creationist would be like, well, humans aren't related to the other primates just because of that breakage. You may as well say they're related to guinea pigs or passerines. And then it's like, okay, that's really dumb, because when we look at the actual location of that breakage, it's in a specific place for all of the order primates, and it's in a specific place for all of the passerines and for all of the guinea pigs, and those three places are different.
Right.
And specific.
And not only that, that's the same case for other genes.
Yeah, that's precisely it. So when convergence is at play, you can suss it out by looking at the actual location of that gene or lack thereof.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
Yeah. Hey,
what did I miss?
Are you there?
What?
Oh, okay. If you'd gone somewhere. Nestle is wanting in. Are we going to wait till a little bit later to open up?
Oh, who wants in?
Nestlig.
Okay. Yeah, I can put a link out. So if you guys are you two ready? This is kind of for Erica and Andrew, so.
Right.
Sure.
I didn't know what y'all intended, so I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't let too many people in, though.
Yeah, we'll let Nestlig in, and I think Brainbug wanted to come in, maybe, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay.
And I'll just keep my mouth shut so I don't interrupt anybody again.
Okay, I was busy looking at documents and doing descriptions and listening to you guys, so I'm not watching the chat. Okay. Sorry, guys.
Do I guess so. Anyway, I was. Oh, there we go. So I was talking
Sorry
about.
for asking. I was just curious with the topic.
Oh no trouble.
Go ahead.
1 sec. Someone talk. My dog is barking.
Oh no, it's okay. I've got 3 in here with me. They're all asleep for now.
Well, let your dog talk. So
fingers crossed.
So Erica, on phylogeny, do they also have like trait analysis? I mean, I haven't seen a lot of work on that. There's a lot of genetic analysis. And has that pretty much replaced the idea of analyzing by structure and traits?
Yeah, like morphology. I mean, morphology, the interesting thing is morphology can be at play. Like morphology can kind of help out. Usually morphology comes into play when you're trying to be like, okay, where do we delineate whether a species is a new species or not? Right. Because speciation is a very strange and arbitrary concept where it's like, and there are a lot of people out there who think we ought to ditch it completely.
And you have to use morphology when it comes to fossils.
Right.
You do the DNA. Yeah.
You do. You do. So and that's actually a great point. That's where morphology tends to come and play a lot more. And that's where we can come up with very general phylogenetic trees. But once you get organisms that start to be very closely, related, they start looking very similar to one another. You kind of get into a little bit of trouble, and those relationships will probably stay very general until paleogenomics kind of advances a bit more.
That's when you get like 100 species in the same genus. Like when they say, "Oh, these species are like very similar to each other, but we don't know which are close to the other ones, so we just put them all in the same genus, and then you have like 100 species in the same genus sometimes."
Right, and which species begets another species also kind of gets a little bit messy. Like, I always bring it to primates because that's what I understand, but it's like with the Australopithecines, we've got 3 primary species: Anamensis, Afarensis, and Africanus, or Africanus, depending on who you talk to. And the general. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Speed.
One thing I'm really interested in is bone morphology, or the geometry of bones.
It's so important. It's muscle attachment spots, stress lines, like all that kind of stuff, and especially paleopathology is another big one. So being able to tell the difference between a novel species and something that was ill is actually incredibly easy. It turns out when something is sick enough to alter its gross morphological bone structure in the skeleton, it tends to leave traces of itself. It tends to be fairly obvious. That's how we can diagnose like bone breakages in tyrannosaurs, right?
There's
like
a whole
take that SFT.
Yeah, he loves that one. He loves that. He brings that one up a lot. And I'm like, your hypothesis works if you want to disregard like taphonomy and paleopathology entirely. Which is what I was going to say.
Paleopathology is just, that's the whole field, is identifying that stuff.
It's but to what I was saying a moment ago, with the morphology at play with the Australopithecines, Anamensis seems very basal, and it appears before all of the other ones do. So it seems reasonable to say, okay, well, this is probably our first known Australopithecine, and then Afarensis is in the same location and overlaps a bit with Anamensis. So the thinking is that Afarensis probably came from a population of Anamensis or someone intermediate. And then you've got Africanus or Africanus down in South Africa. And the question is, okay, well, did because it overlaps a bit with both. So did it come from Afarensis or did it come from Anamensis? And the answer is we're not 100% sure.
I have a question, Gutsick. You are familiar with like the Phylocode project? Like some want to replace the old Linnaean system of classification with like a hard cladistic or phylogenetic based. So I was wondering if you have an opinion about it regarding like human evolution, like if we adopted the system of the Phylocode to the Australopithecines and such, and then we ourselves would also be classified as Australopithecines, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the issue, right? Because it's like we don't know which particular, like we don't know that Australopithecus afarensis is directly in our lineage.
No. I mean the genus or the whole group, the Australopithecines, right? So we are still within that clade.
Right, theoretically, right, theoretically. So that gets you really start to get in the weeds there, and it tends to be easier for paleontologists to be like, okay, well, let's decide who everyone is first, and then we'll try to draw those lines. And the problem is you can't with any certainty say that the ancestor of genus Homo is from Afarensis or Africanus or Anamensis. You can't say for certain.
Right.
You can use molecular clocks and kind of trace it back and saying, okay, well, we end up, it looks like in this location at around this time period. And
do we know which one is closer to our ancestor? Like, I think the Australopithecines form like a paraphyletic array. Like some Australopithecines are closer to us than they are to other Australopithecines, right?
It depends on who you ask, because you're
really?
And it depends on which member of Homo you're looking at too. Because Habilis, for instance, or like Habilis and Sediba have quite a bit of overlap with their morphology. But Habilis appears, if memory serves, in East Africa, and Sediba is down south. So it's difficult because you've got a bunch of bipedal hominins living in a location and being exposed to very similar pressures. and they are coping with these strategies because they live in distinct geographic areas in similar ways. And so it's difficult to say, okay, who beget who here, so to speak. Right?
I'm not saying who is ancestral to who. I'm just saying like who is more closely related to who, as cousins. Like which are the closest cousins to our lineage? That's what I'm asking.
It's going to be Afarensis or Africanus, and it depends on which trait became more derived first, which we can't say.
They are close. They are close to us, and for example, the robust Australopithecines.
They're more similar to Homo than they are to the Paranthropines.
Yes. Oh.
Yeah, the Paranthropines are like a whole different kind of hominin. I mean, and that's what makes them so cool. We've got these cousins over on the side who are doing very weird things.
They became like more herbivore like than us, our lineage.
Oh, you have to see the sagittal crest on these guys.
Right.
They've got this massive sagittal crest. They've got molars. Boisei, for example, has molars in the back that are 4 times the size of our molars, and these guys were smaller than us. So these guys are, I mean, they're impressive chewers, to say the least.
I remember the documentary of, I think it was Walking with Apes, I think. You have like these two coexisting species. One was just chowing on grass, and the other one was just hunting prey. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Australopithecines may have had a one-up kind of on the Paranthropines in the long run because of a more generalist strategy. These Paranthropines were chewing a lot of shoots and tubers and things like that, and cracking nuts, the nutcracker man, consuming a lot of hard food stuff, sedges. And when climatic change kind of descended upon Africa, it might have been more difficult for them to kind of cope because they're still quite large animals, and they're like gorillas. They would have been like gorillas. They had to spend all day sitting around eating because they're eating such calorie poor food. Whereas
I would also imagine that you wouldn't get enough nutrients for like a large brain with that type of diet.
They probably had, it's a shame that we don't get to see, but they probably had really similar digestive systems to gorillans. They probably had those big, massive fermenting guts, and just spent all day sitting around chewing. Whereas your Australopithecines, more generalist, they're taking advantage of any and everything they can, including scavenging and perhaps hunting when they had the opportunity.
I got a question for everybody in here. Do you think that you'll see Homo sapien resolved as Australopithecus sapien within your lifetime?
No.
You think they'll resolve Australopithecines under Homo then? I don't think that'll work either.
I think people are going to be fighting about that for a really long time.
It's the right thing to do, really.
Yeah. I don't know about that. The thing that complicates it is that we're constantly finding more specimens. Like the hominin fossil record grows richer by the year, and in some cases it's helpful, and in others it's not so much. I mean, the Homo naledi down in Rising Star Cave was kind of interesting because you've got this late surviving hominin with super basal features, which kind of, but it's living contemporaneously with all of these other hominins that are quite derived. So it's the more hominins you find, the more you realize that we've kind of got this plastic morphology that's able to react and change to be more basal or more derived depending on the circumstances. So you could have an organism that gets super derived, and then the environment changes and it's more advantageous to go kind of back primitive, if you will.
Do you think that Homo naledi is like a more derived species, but then subsequently became or adopted a more plesiomorphic morphology?
Yeah, basically. I think that's possible. I think given its location and given its competition, it's definitely possible.
I thought that because of the morphology, it was more considered as a long distant cousin that survived, and that's why it had this more ancestral morphology, but still coexisted. That's also possible.
That's the question. Is it this population that just kind of hung around, subsisting in the background, and just made its living continuing on while other populations became more derived, or did it also become more derived and then get basal again? Who is to say at present?
What's your theory, Erica, about how Naledi got into that cave to begin with, because it's no small feat. Was it a bigger cave with wider tunnel systems back then, or could they see in the dark like well, not like bats, but could they see in the dark?
That's a really good question. I've wondered that myself. Some people think that predators, managed to wedge them in there, and then through flooding or something like that, ended up pushing them much deeper than they were. Some people have proposed that I tend to not lean this way, but some people propose that it was like a ceremonial thing where they're taking their dead in there with intent. But because of what you said, right? We don't have any support for these guys being excellent cave dwellers, and it's very difficult to get in there without a light. I believe there's a whole section of Rising Star Cave that's like the squeeze, and they had to get a bunch of small lady anthropologists to get in there because no one could fit. It's very difficult to get to where they found these guys, and the geologic history of that location doesn't suggest that it's changed radically since these guys ended up in that location. So a cave-in or a big shift in the in that area's rocks or whatever, for one reason or another, where it used to be a much wider tunnel and easy to get into, and now it's not. That's not very supported. So I almost have to take the stance that it has to be some kind of weird predator hiding their food, much like a leopard would in some situation, and then environmental conditions pushing them further back in there. But then that's weird too, because
were there any signs of like predation on the bones? Like if there was like a big cat or maybe something else that could drag all the bodies inside, I would expect to find like at least some teeth marks or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. You would think, and normally that's the case, and I don't think there's any of that. But to me, that seems it almost has to be something of that nature. There's no way that they could have fallen in there. There's a lot of horizontal walking. Some people have proposed, okay, well, maybe they had light, like maybe they had fire. But the thing about fire is, especially if it's like using like primitive resins and stuff, burning primitive things like that, is it leaves marks on cave ceilings. So, Neanderthal rock shelters are readily identifiable because they would light these fires in the caves, and then you would end up with these soot layers on the ceiling. In fact, you can actually date Neanderthal rock shelters by looking at how many layers of ash there are on the ceiling or whatever, bar and stuff like that, much like a fireplace. And we don't find that in Rising Star Cave. So it doesn't look like and if it's ceremonial, unless it was perhaps a one-time thing, like it very well could be that Naledi is capable of using fire in the sense that maybe it scavenges it from wildfires and then they keep it going for long periods of time, which is thought to be the beginning of fire use by hominins, is that it's like, oh, wildfire, this stuff's really warm and it keeps predators away. We can't make it, but we can at least keep it going if you feed it.
Yeah. Can they tell that some specimens are older than others, or can they see that they all pretty much were laid down there at the same time? Or
I think that so we know that there's a pretty wide range in age for these organisms, like for the specimens that come out of Rising Star, because I think we've got some younger and some more geriatric specimens coming out of there. But I don't think that they've actually, or if they have, I haven't seen it, because Naledi, I just haven't looked into it as much in recent times. And I know they're pulling currently, like I follow Lee Berger on Twitter, and currently they're pulling more stuff out of Rising Star Cave. Like they're getting more material. So there's more stuff in there. I wonder, I don't know if they've even done it to this degree yet, but I wonder if they've managed to really scout out that area and see if maybe there's another entrance. That would solve a lot of the problems.
I think I heard something about a possibility of a well or something, or some other entrance where it's possible that things fell in or were put down there or whatever. But I was pick a primate today. What kind? Okay, they have tribes, right? So
like troops, clans, whatever.
Troops, whatever. Yeah. How big are the troops?
Depends on the species.
Okay. Can you give me a range? Like,
you want a range for primate group sizes?
Yeah, I guess so. What I'm fishing for here is interbreeding, and how many of these what is the troop size, and how much genetic mixing is going on between troops, and how does that happen in primates today? And you can you can pick any species that you. I mean, we must have tracked some of this stuff very seriously, right?
That's a really good question. So the range, are you ready for this? The range on primate group sizes, which I had to use mean group sizes for my thesis, is 1 to 800 in the case of mammals. So you get big, massive groups with these larger cercopithecoids. Geladas are up there as well. Gelada baboons. They're not actually baboons. They're epithecids, but they get quite large in their group size as well. Same with Hamadryas baboons. And usually what happens with these guys is they've got their big, massive group size, and then they form smaller groups within that big group size. Now, using those guys or using orangs, who their mean group size, depending on the subspecies, is 1, or sometimes they form consorts or traveling bands between juveniles or whatever. They tend to stay very small. The best way to look at this would be to look at our closest living relatives, which are the pannons. So for chimps and bonobos, what's that going to look like? And pannons are interesting because they're also really diverse. You've got some chimp subspecies that have groups of, 50, 60 individuals. And of course, they're fission-fusion, so they have their main troop, and then during the day, they split up to forage in smaller groups or as individuals. And this is the same that we see in bonobos, Panpaniscus. But in bonobos, their interactions with extra group individuals is very different than that of chimps, of common chimps. Right. Chimps wage war on each other. They are not outsiders. They will go at it and very
troglodyte. The bonobo is a bit nicer.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. Chimps will tear each other to pieces if they encounter an extra group member. And the part of the reason for this is because their dispersal system is very unique. In the hominoids, females disperse from their natal group, which is not common in the old world monkeys. Usually it's the males that disperse from the natal group. So outsiders coming in, if they're females, tend to be welcomed by the males and harassed by the females. Right. So, and then outsider males are just killed. We'll just tear each other to pieces. But
the reason I'm asking about that is the mess of fossil evidence we have for the evolution of humans, right? The tribe size and the intermixing of these groups, I think, would be important as to how much. I mean, how many times did we branch out and then branch back, and start interbreeding again? And what were the sizes of the groups? And then with the out of Africa funnel, basically, what does that look like? And how much? I mean, how much? Somebody must be modeling this stuff, right?
So
genetically,
I'm sure they are. It's probably going to be with late Homo though, because that's when you're going to be able to get the genetics for the things.
Yeah.
That's when you're going to really be able to look at who's hybridizing with who. But the thing is like, I've heard creationists like to use the whole idea of like, okay, well, maybe you've got weird hybrids. How do you know if it's a species or a hybrid? And I think you almost can just play a numbers game with that. Like, for instance, we know that, who's out here doing the hybridizing? There are many different species of like colobans and even baboons. Baboons are classic for this, that will hybridize. But they don't do it very often because sexual selection tends to be a pretty big player in this. And so if you're going to find a fossil specimen of something, the odds of it being a hybrid tends to be quite low, especially when cognition isn't at play. Because later Homo can just be like, what if I were to just mate with that? And then the other one will be like, what if I were to just mate with that, right? And then they create offspring. There tends to be more thought in it of a what if, rather than with like chimps and bonobos aren't going to readily hybridize with one another. They wouldn't recognize it as a suitor almost.
Well, what are the creationists thinking that if there's hybridization and it becomes more or less human in that hybridization, how in the hell does that happen if we're not related?
I think they don't think the hybridization is going on between humans and apes. I think that that apes hybridizing amongst themselves can lend neonatic human traits.
But I think they've made claims that basically some of the missing link, quote unquote, evidence is some sort of hybridization. But what are they thinking? Because if that's the case, then obviously we're related. I don't.
Yeah, you know, Speed, your guess is, and that's why, and I know Brainbug wants to say something because he's about to go, but that's why you've got guys even like SFT and some of the bigger creation stories like creation.com who will readily just be like, yeah, humans are primates. God just made us that way. It doesn't mean we're related to other primates, but we are primates. Right. That is what we are. And I think that is definitely the route that they need to take, but they need to tread very carefully because it's a lot easier to make the connection between an ape evolving from another kind of ape versus, the mythical human, so unique, coming from the lowly ape that is a separate kind. So dangerous games they play.
Then the other claim that SFT keeps making is that Lee Berger claimed that there were some fossils that were actually like one particular fossil consisted of two organisms. Is that what he's saying?
No, I did that. I did that one to death a while ago. Usually what that's referring to is that Lucy had a baboon bone found.
One bone.
One cervical vertebra. Now, I dissected this in, like, we went through papers comparing the cervical vertebra of genus Papio, genus Dinopithecus, Therapithecus, Australopithecus, and Homo. If to an untrained eye, these are indistinguishable from one another. And when Lucy was found, there wasn't much to compare it to. So
Lee Berger never actually said what SFT is claiming he said.
I think if memory serves, he said something about Australopithecus. I think it was Africanus, and Lee Berger has a motivation for this because he's pushing that Sediba, Australopithecus sediba, is basal to Homo.
Okay.
And there's been some infighting in the paleoanthropological community about this because not everybody is on board with Sediba being basal to Homo. It's definitely an Australopithecine, but whether it's Africanus, Sediba, or Afarensis is kind of up in the air. And Sediba's overlap with genus Homo makes it, to the general paleoanthropological community, unlikely that it's led to the rise of genus Homo, particularly since geographically you've got these guys hanging out in South Africa, and some people want to put the emergence of Homo in East Africa, others in South. It's because similar things are happening in both places. So I believe what Berger was claiming, I'll have to dig through my notes on this one. I remember I looked into this very specifically because I was like, that's very strange that Berger would say that. And what I do remember, I don't remember which hominin he was claiming might be a mixed bag or whatever, because it was in a bone pit or something along those lines with no articulation. Whereas his specimens of MH1 and MH2 have articulation to them, making them definitively mosaic hominins, something SFT refuses to comment on. But in that same article that he talks about that, Berger asserts that it simply must be Australopithecus sediba that begets Homo.
Yeah.
So what is the takeaway from that article? Well, SFT thinks the takeaway is that you can get mixed bag hominins. Well, the takeaway is that Berger thinks that his candidate is better because his candidate has articulated sections, which definitively precludes them from being mixed bag hominins.
Right.
So if Standing wants to invoke this, he is backing himself into an enormously difficult to escape corner, because all of a sudden he's accepting a source that definitively says Australopithecus sediba, an articulated, mosaic, true epitome of transition, is at the base of genus Homo.
Yeah.
So he has to say he has to propose like the hominin kablooey hypothesis, where the two species
Kablooey?
Kablooey, yeah. They bump right into each other and made a perfectly articulated mix of two
Not
specimens.
just that, but their articular surfaces on a microscopic level also match up. So
yeah. What are the odds?
Each other so fast that they just combined.
Yeah.
Okay,
they did the fusion dance.
All right, I do got to go. I just want to ask one question, and then you all. It's not about the subject; is more about Erica studies. Have you had any direct contact with any great apes?
Have I seen them in person?
Yeah, have you interacted with them in person?
Yeah, I was in Gombe Stream National Park, which is where Jane Goodall did her work. It was when Ferdinand was the alpha male, and we actually got to get up close and personal with a lot of those chimps.
Okay, so have you compared their culture in captivity to their culture in the wild?
I have not, but that is actually a very interesting question to ask, and there's a lot of work being done on that. Their social structure is very different in the wild versus in captivity.
They can't treat new coming members the same way as they would in the wild, I would assume.
No, and females hold greater power in captivity than they do in the wild, because they actually have to fight to hold their position, whereas in the wild they can just leave, like they can just go somewhere else. But when a male is bullying a female in captivity, they actually have to like defend their resources. They can't go anywhere. So they tend to be more aggressive in captivity than they are in the wild.
Is bonobos the same? Are they more aggressive in captivity?
Yeah. In fact, there's actually been some pretty disturbing work on captive bonobos who will just physically abuse a male who cannot get away.
Wow.
Groups of them will just, I mean, they're not nice to the boys. The bonobos aren't, not in captivity, and really not in the wild either. The contrast between the chimps and the bonobos is very funny.
So we got to round back
to. All I wanted to ask. I'll talk to you guys later.
See you, Brainbug.
Thanks, Brian. We got to round back to Andrew, who inspired this stream, and find out what else you got, Andrew. But Secular Pagan Mom had, I think, a question.
Yeah, they are from the same. Yeah, they're both Panins. They both, the thinking is that chimps evolved with the pressure of gorillas being present, and that's why they have this much more aggressive society than bonobos do on their side of the Congo. But you know, what is different? What is very different? I mean, these guys are very, very closely related, but they have immensely different cultures, immensely different social structures. Probably just due to the nature of their local pressures.
Okay. So Andrew, what else?
So I had some further questions for Erica, if that's okay. I don't know how long you guys want to go, maybe like half an hour or
we got to quit by, I'm thinking we got to quit by Tuesday.
Might be a good idea.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I guess my first question, Erica, would be, so earlier we were talking about these phylogenetic methods for sorting out character conflicts, and then we got into this other stuff. But do you think like there are some differing opinions, of course, in different camps over which is more reliable? I think most would agree that likelihood and Bayesian inference are generally statistically sound.
Bayesian inference is going to be what you're going to see in the literature, probably moving forward consistently. There are some holdouts, but statistically speaking, Bayesian is just a really solid way to do it.
Right. So, and do you have any preference personally, or like, I guess which do you use is what I'm asking.
I haven't done any kind of like phylogenetics myself, other than like corrections. Like I run phylogenetic correction, or I ran a phylogenetic correction for my thesis, but that's essentially just accounting for the impact of relationships when examining present ones. So phylogenetic inertia can be a thing, right? So sometimes a trait persists just because it's not been selected against, and not because it's necessarily currently beneficial. So phylogenetic inertia is something you have to keep an eye out for whenever you're trying to account for evolution within a study of relationships between traits, which is what I did for my thesis. I mean, I would use Bayesian if I had to pick, just because most of the folks that I've worked with use it. It's popular. That's it because it works. It's really nice. It's a great method.
And so for I guess it's been a while since I've looked into the different phylogenetic methods, and probably most of the audience may or may not know about it. So do you think you could summarize or describe the basic method of Bayesian inference?
I mean, we can go through it. It's been quite some time since I've gotten into the weeds with Bayesian as well, and I certainly don't want to butcher it on camera.
And Bayesian is just one of the methods. Like there's also maximum parsimony and maximum likelihood, and also neighbor joining. There are lots of different methods. Yes.
So maybe I should ask an unrelated question, and we can talk about that some other time, perhaps.
We can. I mean, it's one of those things that I would like to review because it's been a while since I've really gotten into it. And it's kind of like Bayesian is one of those things where it's not like cosmology where I can be like, well, here's what I know. Like Bayesian is pretty specific. Walker's currently doing that now. He would be the one to talk to about that if you want to get the details on the inner workings of Bayesian inference.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that this kind of combines a whole bunch of stuff for you, Andrew. We have extant species, and we're making guesses about how they're related. So we're making guesses about historical science, quote unquote. Again, air quotes, please. So we're trying to make the best guess about what is related to what and what branched off. And that also brings up what I was saying about bones and morphology. When you look at embryology, which is kind of what I'm really interested in, it's almost like when you look at embryology, you're interested in those gene regulation areas, which are very tiny. And it's almost like a butterfly flapping its wings can make a humerus change considerably, because it's a 4-dimensional developmental matrix with great complication that will create these different morphologies. But we're trying to make these guesses, and then and then of course we have the entire genome, which we carry from one generation to another, and it mutates, and so we can make all of these connections. But it is very complicated, and it's a field that has got to be in a little bit of flux, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are great complications. Any one method, I don't think, is going to do it for us.
But one problem with phylogenetics, like the usual method, is like when you see a position on the genome, like if an A in some species and if a C in some other species, but you can't say which one is the original letter, basically. So you need to have a lot of more data to tell which is the more likely scenario. Like was the ancestor had the ancestor an A or a C or maybe a T, and then in which order did the mutations occur? Like
and then some of them can go backwards to what they used to be.
Yes,
there's
exactly.
There's only 4 letters we got, So,
and this is where you get things like a long branch attraction. Like if you have some species that have like a very high mutation rate, then you can get reversals, and then the longer the branch get, the more likely they are to basically attract each other, and you get false phylogenies based on that. Yes.
Yeah, and then like in protein evolution. What is most telling is when you have when you have an indel insertion or deletion, because that is pretty statistically safe to assume. But with protein evolution, you're going to end up with this coalescence, and sometimes the phylogenies aren't going to match for these different proteins because of the way coalescence works.
One very useful genetic data is what is called transposons, where you have if you have an insertion of a transposon in a specific place in the genome, you are pretty sure that it's a derived state. Like the absence of the transposon in this location is the original, the ancestral state, and the presence is the derived state. And then when you see a set of species sharing this transposon at this particular place and the others not, they are pretty sure that the ones that share this trait are more closely related to the other ones. But of course, you still need to account for incomplete lineage sorting. Like some species can lose this transposon after, even though the ancestor population had it still.
Yeah. Boy, the SFT crowd is making some, and the creation sites are making a big deal out of this variation inducing genetic elements. Have you heard about this? variation inducing genetic. They're
No.
ERVs. They believe that somehow God designed these retroviruses and basically transposons so that they would create variation. But the problem with that is that transposons work stochastically. And so they're kind of saying that what God did was very similar to what we're claiming evolution does.
Yeah.
Stochastically, right? So they kind of, again, they put themselves in a little box and they don't quite realize it yet. It's kind of funny.
But this is also a complete red herring. Like they obviously want to say like, oh, this thing is not junk, it's functional. Although they are mostly wrong. Most ERVs and transposons are not functional whatsoever. But even if they are functional, we still know that ERVs are unique insertions that happened by a virus infection. So it's not the fact that they somehow may be functional is not relevant whatsoever when it comes to that significance of common ancestry. Like they are still. Yeah, there are still evidence of common ancestry.
That functional ERV thing drives me crazy because they read anywhere that we talk about functional ERVs, like in some kind of in literature for covering endogenous retroviruses as a whole. This is classic. The same sentence has happened at least on 2 occasions in my literature searches where they will say that some ERVs can be functional. The first half of that sentence is, while many ERVs lack a function, some are functional. Or it'll be the second half where it'll be like, some ERVs are functional, despite the fact that many lack a function. So it's like, that's just left out. And you have to intentionally ignore like half of the sentence that you find the functional portion, to quote mine.
Yeah, I was going to say that I looked up, SFV likes to flash papers on the screen, and I like to look them up. And I looked up like 3 out of the 5 that he showed, and they talked about how a very small number of transposons are found to be functional.
Yep.
Yeah.
We expect to find a few more.
I have to add some more detail. Like we say that some are functional. It's actually more correct to say that none of them are entirely functional. Only in some cases, one portion of the ERV has a function. Like ERVs have at least like some have 4 genes, I think, but most have at least 3 genes: GAG, POL, and ENV. And in one case, the ENV has gained a function and is now functional in like the formation of our placenta, the ENV gene.
That's their favorite. That's their favorite one. So another thing that's very interesting is that creationists, they have so many theological stopgaps that really create problems for them. That damn ark, if they didn't have that ark, they would have a much easier situation. It's the ark, and it's also the fall. That's the second issue that they have. Because if ERVs are inherently vital for placental development and things of that nature, then it would have to be present prior to the fall, quote unquote. But these are the same people that say viruses aren't very good and cause death, decay, and whatever. So they couldn't have been present in Eden. Right. So they built these weird theological boxes for themselves, which is why they have to take the position that ERVs aren't actually viruses. That creates a whole separate issue because ERVs are definitely former viruses. And we know this because if you take an ERV and you put it in, you xenotransplant it, you put it in an organism that it wasn't co-opted for lack of a better term, it starts to behave like a virus again.
Yeah.
So
and not only that, when a virus or a retrovirus inserts itself into the genome, it creates like flanking motifs that are really characteristics, and they are there with ERVs. They are flanked with these signs of insertions. So they are not uniquely created there on the spot. They were once free living viruses, and they inserted themselves into the genome, and it still has these scars of insertions.
That's a great point, Nestle, because if we're going to take the position that these are specially created, then you have to take the position of a deceptive God who put the signs of insertion there, flanking this ERV, for the sole purpose to give the impression that it was inserted and needs to be free living.
Test our faith.
Oh, creo debunk.
Yeah.
Maybe it had run in the opposite way. I don't know what you mean by that. We know that they're viruses.
That's their new theory, is that viruses came from God. God created the transposons, and then viruses evolved from that, and they basically escaped from the human genome and became viruses. But it wouldn't matter either way that it happened, because they're still viruses, and they still behave like viruses.
That still doesn't account for the insertion sites that I just mentioned. So we still know that they have inserted themselves into the genome.
I think that becomes very troublesome too, Creo, for the issue of reconstructing phylogenetic trees from ERVs. I don't think that it should function in that light. It should be backwards, right? You should see this running in the opposite direction. If the viruses came from the insertable elements, it shouldn't follow forward. You shouldn't be able to show evolution from something basal within ERV to something more derived in organisms. That wouldn't work. It's completely
and the biggest problem with the whole virus as a design is that the viruses, when they do jump and when they do duplicate, they do not do it by any prescribed machine-like network mechanism. It is stochastic. There are certain sites that they attach to, but it is not a given as to when one is going to reproduce or jump. So if God did it that way, then God is rolling the dice in order to create this variation. And that just doesn't make any, that goes back to its evolution. So no matter what they say.
In which case, why not just have him do all of evolution that way? Like, if he's constantly tinkering with the genetics actively, where's the line there? It doesn't.
Yeah, is he guiding the viruses still?
Oh, he's asking about the signs of insertions, and one of the signs of insertions are called LTRs, which stands for long terminal repeats. Like basically, when the virus inserts itself, it attaches to the details are. I will skip over the details, but there is a section in the genome where it becomes duplicated and basically copies itself, flanking the ERV itself. So you can see here's a section that matches also the other section of the flanking all the other sides. So that these are the LTRs that are created during the insertion. I have here a source where you can read more on the details and see also the response, the typical responses you can expect from creationists when it comes to ERVs. Like, for example, some of them are functional. Well, even if they are functional, it's irrelevant. They are still insertions. Which makes them evidence.
The thing about the phylogenetic trees is it's conceptual, right? So if you've got an original organism that's created with an ERV that viruses then come from, then you shouldn't be able to track descendants through ERVs that change a bit over time. You shouldn't be able to do that. The way that change would work would be reversed, if that makes sense.
The other problem with viruses is that most of the time in the somatic line, when they jump, they tend to kill us. If they jump badly, they either kill us. It's either neutral, it's either beneficial, or it's deleterious, usually deleterious. So these things are not a really good way to vary an organism, because they kill us a lot. So anyway, but we survive anyway. Yeah. But if you want more information on ERVs, there are probably I'm guessing around 40,000 papers out there right now on this problem, because cancer is one of the things that they're researching, and that has a bit to do with that. So
there's also another similar thing, it's called a type of pseudogene that is created by sometimes normally when a gene expresses itself, it creates a messenger RNA or mRNA, but occasionally the mRNA gets reverse transcribed back into the genome, but in the opposite way. So we have sometimes you have the reverse of the gene in the genome, like at random places in the genome, pretty much. Of course, it's not entirely random, but still pretty much at random places in the genome. And when we see these pseudogenes, or very specific types of pseudogenes, they are still also insertions again. And we see that we share many of them with chimpanzees in the exact same locations in the genome. Odd, right? Very odd.
Yeah, Oh.
Danny's tired. He was up all night.
There's one specific family of these genes. They are called the NANOG pseudogene family, I think, right?
Yeah, the NANOG. Yeah, it's NANOG. Yeah, those ones.
NAOGOG, I think. Yes, NANOG. Yeah.
That's a really cool group to look at. You know, a lot of the problems that creationists seem to have here is like principle, and I've talked about this on this channel before, but like the principles of heredity, right? So like it's descent with modification. That's what evolution is, and that's how these relationships can be determined using phylogenetics, right? The super basic premise of it is the more similar the genome of two organisms, the more closely related they are, because that's how things cross over and change as reproduction occurs.
Synteny also very
right.
It's also interesting. It's also interesting. Like if you look at like two species that creationists would accept are totally in the same kind. Like for example, if you look at rats and mice, most creationists would say like, oh, they're the same kind. But when you look at the genomes, like the synteny, they don't match really at all. Like there are some big sections that do match, but you have signs of like at least 3 fusion events even. Like some chromosomes on mice are fused in rats and some others are fused in mice. But with us, with chimpanzees, only 1 fusion and the rest are pretty much identical.
Total identity is a great way to look at it of the genome. And, you know, some of the favorites to toss out are humans and chimps for coding base pairs are more similar than Asian elephants are to African elephants, lions are to tigers, a house cat is to a tiger, and rats are to mice. I mean, they don't have a way to standardize this is the problem. They can't create a standardized method to lump in all the kinds that they require to be lumped together in order to fit them on that boat, and also keep humans separate from the rest of the hominids. They can't do it.
Exactly. If you say that the rats are related to mice, or if you say that the tigers are related to lions, and you have no excuse to say that humans are not related to chimpanzees. Like you are inconsistent if you do that.
Another fun thing that I've been seeing tentatively being started to be tossed around is that it's a difference in expression. So you'll get creationists who will say, well, you know, maybe they are very similar, but the expression is very, very different, and that's what makes them unique. Well, first of all, yes, expression is at play, but it's also at play in rats and mice and Asian elephants and African elephants and lions and tigers and house cats. That expression is to the same degree across the board, but you have to create it standardizable for them as well. So if you want to do the expression for humans and chimps in order to separate them, I guarantee you're going to also end up separating yet again the guys that you need to be similar. Particularly because expression is more touchy than actual identity. You're just not going to be able to do it. And they'll throw this out there despite the fact that there hasn't actually been all that much work done on expression. And to my knowledge, expression is less, or it's not as diagnostic of relatability, I guess would be better. I'm very tentative on that because there hasn't been all that much done on it. But typically,
expression only varies on like a one dimension, like you have either high or low, and it's not really informative that way. So
right.
Maybe if you have a very large data set, you can say like, oh, these two species have a very more similar expression levels when it comes to genes. But I am not familiar with studies like that. So.
Yes, for Creo, there's a lot of stuff. Literally go on Google Scholar and you can be like ERVs across hominids, and it's something along those lines. I can't remember the paper title precisely. You'll find a really great examination. I think it's humans, chimps, and I think they include gorillas.
We share pretty much all of our ERVs, right?
Yeah, with chimps, yeah, and if memory serves, like as usual, the difference in ERVs between humans and chimps is less, and humans and bonobos is less than that between chimps and gorillas.
Yeah, and there's varying regulatory mechanisms that keep them things in line, and in some species, and in one species over time, it basically changes as to how much those genes are going to duplicate and jump. And that gets cut back and it moves forward. And I think there are some primates that have a few ERVs or transposons that are replicating rather rapidly, I think.
You get, there are some primates that are doing some really funky things genetically, and they seem, for lack of a better term, more plastic than other groups. So hylobatids, they vary greatly in their number of chromosomes. And yet the creationists will lump them all in the same group and then turn around and say humans can't be hominids because we have fewer chromosomes. So it's never standardized, ever. You won't see it.
No.
I like what Jackson Reed found one day when they, like in some terminology stuff, like there was one creationist who was addressing the bovines or the bovids, like sheep, cows, and antelopes and such, and they are all like sheep. It's actually weird when you think about it, but sheep are still in the same taxonomic family as cows, along with goats and a few others.
Cervids and stuff.
Exactly. And the creationist was like, well, since most people don't think that cows are related to sheep, we will just put them in different kinds. That's it. Right. That's literally what it says.
My favorite is in their mammal separations of kinds. They talk about how one of the reasons why humans need to be lumped away from the pongids, as they choose to label the other apes, is because our brains are so much larger. And then they turn around and they lump all of the Cercopithecus together. Now, Cercopithecus are old world monkeys, and so that means that they have mandrills, one of the biggest old world monkey we know of, in the same group as talapoins, which are the smallest old world monkey that we know of, and whose brain disparity is greater than that of humans and chimps. So,
right.
You know what I mean? Like you can't. There's absolutely no even attempt to make any of this, like any of these criteria, unilateral across the mammals. They don't care, or at least they don't seem to care.
Right.
There must be for sure a comparison, I guess. That
few chromosomes.
Yeah. There's so much out there. I'm going to shill for myself here. Watch my video on this, because I think I with the help of Evograd, I went through all of the reasons why we know that chromosome 2 is a fusion of 12A and 12B.
You can also look for synteny, like a S.
The synteny diagram is the most important thing to look at. There's no denying that. You don't need to look any further. And SFT's highly functional DDX11L2.
Oh, that's L1, so funny.
I mean, that gene, that pseudogene, is just one little tiny fragment of a DDX11 gene. And it to say that that's highly functional, every time he does it, I want to climb through my screen and grab him by the throat.
It's barely, here's the kicker. It is barely distinguishable from noise.
Yeah.
True genes light up. This is
not
barely distinguishable from noise.
It doesn't have any functional domain, so it couldn't do anything, even if it, no matter how many times you transcribe it, it's not a viable protein. It's just a fragment.
It's also a member of a telomere gene family.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Specific gene family. It's the only one that isn't at the telomeres.
Right. Yeah, but there's another important point to remember. Like again, the same with the ERVs. Like they want to say, oh, they are functional, but even if they are functional, it doesn't matter. They are still insertions and therefore prove a common ancestor. But with regard to the DDX11L2 gene, even if it was functional, it does not mean that the fusion site is not a fusion site. It's still a fusion site. So there we go. It's a complete red herring, even if he was right.
Well, not to mention that you've got the alphoid repeats for the cryptic centromere. You've got the telomeric repeats smack dab in the middle of human chromosome 2. You've got the synteny across the top and bottom of 2A and 2B with 12A or with 12 and 13 for chimps. It is absolutely mind-boggling that anyone could propose that this is an fusion site, which is why when creationists argue it, they will say it's not a fusion site, it's not a fusion site, it's not a fusion site. And then when you prove it, they'll say, well, even if it is, it doesn't matter. Because fusion happened after the split with the planets. Yeah. Okay, thank you for wasting my time. Like,
Kriyabank is asking about the protein. If I remember correctly, the protein of the DDX11L2 is not identified. So it's probably a case of spurious transcription. Like occasionally an RNA is made, but the RNA is just degraded almost immediately thereafter. Probably.
Yeah. I believe I remember something about spurious transcription as well.
Yeah. Of course, creationists don't believe in spurious transcription, but we know that it does happen. I think it was like a study that like turned off the mechanisms that basically degrade spurious RNAs, and then they observe like almost across the board increased expression of like random sequences, basically. So yeah, there are mechanisms there to prevent spurious transcription, but it still happens occasionally.
Dude, the only reason they don't like spurious transcription is because they think it contributes to this idea that the majority of the human genome is junk and doesn't do anything. Right. You don't have to invoke spurious transcription to show that the majority of the genome is junk. You can just you can literally just look at the knockout tests that we've done on mice. You can knock up to 50% of that genome out, and that mice will have little mice babies successfully and live a normal life. This is a done deal.
The screenshot I'm showing right now, it's kind of hard to see because it's long and I can't expand it anymore. Shows the DDX11 genes for the rat, for the human and chimpanzee. And that little short thing you see on the third row, that is DDX11L2. So these are actual DDX11 genes, and they have 8 domains in them that are active sites that actually do something. And none of it's called a dead box. The DDX11 means dead box. There is no dead box domain in this DDX11L2. And you can see how short it is compared to the actual genes. And then there's a longer version of it that isn't much longer than this. And when it does that, it reverse transcribes. So it's a totally different kind of thing to begin with. And the functionality, if you look between humans and chimpanzees, these two genes are 92% identical. If you look between humans or chimpanzees and rats, it's about 52% identical. And I colored each amino acid differently when I drew this chart. But the important thing to know about his highly functional gene, look at it. It's pretty tiny. It doesn't matter. It's a little chunk, a fragment.
It's not even, and again, the size of it too is what partially contributes to the fact that it is, again, barely indistinguishable from background noise.
And
genes light up. They don't behave that way. They're not hard to find if they're important. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
But he's got to characterize creationists. They have to characterize it in this very specific way in order to paint it as this vital, vitally important portion of the chromosome that therefore precludes the fact that this fusion occurred. Never mind the fact that genes can move. So theoretically, this could have been a very important gene that existed, and then a fusion did occur, and it was shifted downstream.
And I've searched Google Scholar forever, and there's like 1 or 2 papers on DDX11L2, and they have to do with bad mutations. I think 1 paper or 2 papers. There's absolutely no proof of any function for that gene at all.
I haven't seen any of it either, and it's covered in the original fusion paper, which I think was in 2002. I believe they discussed that. Although it might have been a later one. Don't quote me on that.
So, are you going to write your next your dissertation on this topic that Chris Peacock has brought up about monkey pig hybrids?
I've not
That one.
I've not heard of that happening. I know that there have been some interesting claims that have come out of there. Supposedly, a while back, there was this proposal that they made a macaque-human hybrid in China. A bunch of Spanish scientists were proposing it. Now, I don't know that anything ever came to it. They claim that the reason, like, they claim that they didn't publish on it, and they claim that they terminated the hybrid prior to, like, I think it made it. They claim it made it to like 6 weeks or something like that, and before they intentionally terminated it. So I don't.
There was a documentary on South Park about the man bear pig.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw that or not. Yeah,
it wouldn't surprise me if such hybrids existed, but I don't think there's anything credible out there that they're creating legitimate hybrids rather than just creating hybrid organs or growing human organs within pigs or real small scale stuff. That being said, we don't know everything that everyone's up to. So again, it wouldn't surprise me if someone had done it, but I haven't seen anything official on it. So
Andrew, make some noise. You're quiet.
Mm-hmm.
You got any other questions or anything else you want to do?
Yeah, but I don't. Or I don't know how long you guys want to go.
You fell asleep, didn't you?
You can continue. No,
I've just been listening.
Okay.
So I guess I had one or two last questions, and then maybe we can wrap up.
Okay.
Say that again. I
said okay. The sun is still up. It would be cool if I could get out there before it goes down. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So Erica, we often hear that you often hear that common descent is a fact of is a scientific fact, and I wanted to ask what your thoughts on what exactly that means and why that is the case.
I think that it's fair to say that common descent is a scientific fact. There is nothing with regard to organisms, right? Hold that thought. Let me open this door. My dogs are starting to get annoyed. Hold on.
Okay.
Hey, get out of here. Get out. There is nothing. We know that heredity is a thing, right? And we know that the more similar organisms are across their genome, the more closely related they are. We know that the Earth is very old, and we know that we can also track back morphology to form very broad relationships through time. And we don't know of any stops that exist. So in the same way that you could say the tectonic plates are moving now, and they've probably always been moving, you can take it all the way back to common descent, and conceptually speaking, just based off of what we know about heredity. This is bolstered by the relationships that we actually see, the connections that we can actually make by mapping out these genomes, by going back in time and looking at this rise of complexity and diversification of life from 3.8 billion years ago to present. So I would say it is certainly reasonable to propose that common descent is a fact until someone can present some kind of stop, some kind of, this is an insurmountable jump to make from one life form to another. Now, I've heard Sal recently is he's doing a lot with like protein separate ancestry and things like that. I'm speaking here of common descent from a single organism, like proto-cell to present. And I don't think that anybody, a creationist or otherwise, although I don't know it would be anybody other than a creationist, who has been able to actually draw a line and say, this is the area that cannot be jumped. Sometimes they'll propose it from prokaryotes to eukaryotes. I don't know how reasonable that is. Once we get into the into the small stuff, it starts getting a little bit outside of my realm of expertise. But even if you could propose that was the area and that there's just common ancestry among all eukaryotes, that's highly problematic to their worldview, certainly.
Because SFT often claims I know at least recently claims, for instance, that since our last discussion on common descent, that nested hierarchies are apparently agnostic to the debate, so to speak.
No, that's the most ridiculous thing. He and the rest of the creationists are pushing that really hard because they cannot deny nested hierarchies. They've been faced with this brute fact that nested hierarchies exist, and despite decades of denying that they even do exist, they are now claiming that this is agnostic to the evidence. The reason it's not is because evolution predicted it.
Right.
Therefore, it is in favor of evolution. And if they want to readjust their hypothesis so that it can accommodate nested hierarchies, that's fine. But creationism did not predict it. Therefore, it is less supportive of creationism than evolution.
Yeah, they have to say that the nested hierarchical pattern of like traits among living organisms is like how cars are more similar to each other and how planes are more similar to each other. Like they often give these examples. Like I think Standing even gives the example like, you have like a clade of vehicles, and then the subclade of vehicles with wheels, and a subclade with vehicles with 2 wheels and such. But try to do cladistics with cars, and you cannot make a phylogeny. No.
So there's an amazing bit of hand waving that Sal Cordova does in his latest video that he put out yesterday, where he talks again about phylogenies. He makes his point that God did it so that we could experiment on animals instead of humans, and then he does this thing with he hand waves the whole phylogeny thing away and claims that his zinc fingers shoot a hole in the whole thing, and it's just absolutely amazing. But it's probably I'll put a link in the description. I forget where he gets into it exactly, but it is horrible. I mean, I was listening to him, and it's like he claims that he's got this slam dunk, but he doesn't really say anything. And I was even disappointed in even him, which is a higher bar than being disappointed in SFT.
So let's play devil's advocate. Let's play devil's advocate and say that the zinc fingers do blow a big hole into evolution or whatever.
Right.
You have to have a positive case for creation.
Right.
You have to be able to create not only is this bad for evolution, but it supports creation. And if memory serves, his work on zinc fingers doesn't help with the kinds problem. It doesn't help with the age of the earth. The zinc fingers end at what? Is it the pro and eukaryotic split? Would that be a fair characterization?
No, there are zinc fingers prior to that. So
I wonder what book of the Bible he gets that whole God made animals to be like, similar to us so we can experiment on them. I don't think they were doing experimentation on animals.
I had the wrong video here. It was one from a few days ago. But anyway, I got into the zinc finger thing and his, claim that it's impossible that, something that specific evolves. And it's based on the nuclear localization signal. And it's based on the fact that the zinc fingers multiplied, that they're duplicated. And both of those things fall down entirely. But he claims it's some slam dunk. I don't know.
So I study primates. That's what I like. Extant primates, and then to a lesser degree, human evolution, because both of those things are very fascinating to me. And tangentially to that, they, in and of themselves, primatology precludes young Earth creationism. You can't have young Earth creationism and have humans just have evolved from pre-existing apes. That cannot be the case unless you're going to take a theistic evolutionist stance, which is totally fine with me. So the thing is, nothing I've ever seen from creationists have been able to, for instance, creationists will rarely have that conversation with me. I've offered to have that conversation with, for instance, John Maddox several times. He doesn't want to have it. And it's because human evolution alone is theologically incompatible with young Earth creationism. So creationists have to grapple with this data. They have to cope with human evolution. They have to somehow manage to create the separation between humans and the rest of the apes. And I've never, if Sal wants to say that these other apes were just created for us to experiment on, which is gruesome and incredibly depressing to me, that's fine. But suggesting a hypothetical is not the same thing as providing data for it. He still has to cope theologically with this idea that we just are apes. We just are. There's nothing that we can do with that information that works with necessarily young Earth creationism. And not only that, but you have to deal with the support that we descended from other apes, which creates additional problems. Which is why I would love to have a conversation with Sal or Emery or any of them, really, other than SFT, who's still on my list of not talking to because he's not behaving himself well and won't answer my questions about that, because human evolution is a big problem. You can sit all day long and say abiogenesis is an issue, the proto-eukaryotic transition is an issue, but you're still an ape making those claims, and you still have to cope with the data that you are and that you evolved from other apes, which definitively doesn't work with young Earth creationism. It doesn't. So that, to me, is what makes primatology and human evolution such an interesting subject to discuss with creationists, because they'll always leave it. They'll always try to take it back to abio. We know way more about human evolution than we do about abio, and human evolution in and of itself is highly problematic. So why don't we deal with the much more pressing issue? I'm almost certain that we've got some lurkers watching this. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some of them in the chat at some point. But
the point that you just made is a very good point to remember. As science progresses, mysteries are being solved, and then the types of creationists and also other people will just keep moving away from certain topics and move on to topics where not much is known currently, and they keep moving forward or backwards, depending on how you look at it, depending on what time period you are looking at. Like, I remember one paper that discusses the argument of irreducible complexity, and they note that over time, different systems has been propped up as a poster child of irreducible complex system. Like, first it was a bacterium flagellum, but as scientists have explained this, also other systems, like, for example, the blood clotting cascade and the vertebrate immune system. But over time, as scientists have answered these questions, then the goalpost has been moved to other systems. Like nowadays, the ATP synthase is in fashion as the irreducible complex system. Yeah, it's that's what happens always.
Yep, 100%. And the interesting thing is that it's always poking holes in evolution, or now more fashionably abiogenesis, because it's very difficult to poke holes in evolution, instead of actually formulating a model in and of itself for creation. Why do you suppose that is? Because to have a model would be to expose your model to criticism, and there is no creation model, young Earth creation model, that can stand. Certainly not with the data we have presently. And I am of the opinion, I think that some of these guys know this.
The only argument that I have ever heard in favor of that position is just a version of the watchmaker argument. Like any version, like Otangelo, for example, often makes the analogy with machines and motors and such. It's just a watchmaker, like it's just a watchmaker argument.
Yeah, that's just ID. That doesn't cope with the age of the Earth. That doesn't cope with human evolution. That doesn't cope with cosmology. It creates, that's the problem. They'll create a very strange, very out there hypothesis to deal with one thing, and it down the line creates 10 more problems, right? Like the whole shift, the paradigm shift into every animal got its ass on the ark to kinds, creates a brand new issue of post-flood speciation that wasn't there before. And now, that damn boat, that boat is so problematic. Anyways, Andrew, what was the last thing you wanted to chat about?
So just something you mentioned earlier about how the nested hierarchy was predicted by evolution and common descent and wasn't predicted by creation. And is that kind of along the lines of, I guess, one being more likely than the other? Because I'm trying to understand, like, I have a general idea, but I want to better understand why predicting something first makes it, I guess, if that makes sense.
Because it wasn't just that it predicted it first. Creationists took the opposite stance. they have outwardly been against this idea. Like for a long time, they didn't think speciation could happen. Like the history of creationism is very important here because it doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It exists in the context of all of its predecessors who have openly denied and been dragged kicking and screaming into the modern era of accepting things like speciation or microevolution or, things of that nature, nested hierarchies. So the problem therein lies isn't just that evolution predicted it first. Evolution predicted it and creationism denied it. Creationism said, if creationism is true, this is false. And
of course they act now like as if they have never denied this. For example, if you go even further back, then the creationists would have said that the Earth is stationary and the center of the universe, for example. So, of course, although not modern creationism, that is even further back, of course, but still. And now it was a good example with the Big Bang, for example. Like before, we had the Big Bang theory. And creationists never mentioned anything about the universe expanding, but after the Big Bang theory was discovered, then now you have creationists saying like, oh, this particular verse in the Bible that speaks about the God stretching out the heavens, that is the Big Bang theory. We knew it all along, of course, only after the Big Bang theory has been established. Then you hear them say that.
So why am I showing James Downard's books? Because you mentioned the history of creationism. Because he has so much information in the 2 books that he has, and I'll link both of them.
Yeah, you should buy them. They're great resources. Suppose Andrew, that 2 people came across a flooded field, and both individuals walk up to the flooded field, and it's myself and someone else, and I say, you know what? I think that this field flooded because a river experienced a swelling for whatever reason. It started raining upstream from the river, and the river swelled and it flooded this field. And I'm going to call it the river hypothesis or the river theory. And then the other person said, well, that's all fine and dandy, but I think someone brought a truck here full of water and dumped this water all over this field. And I think that that's why this field is flooded. So I say, okay, well, if my hypothesis is correct, we should be able to walk a mile upstream or up the path or whatever, and we should be able to find a river. We should be able to find a river within a certain distance of this field. And we should be able to look at the weather recently, and we should be able to show that recently it rained, causing this river perhaps to swell and flood this field. And my compatriot says, no. In fact, I will go so far as to say that you won't find a river. There is no such thing as a river within appropriate distance, and I know for a fact that it didn't rain in the past week. So then we go on our way, and we walk upstream, and there, lo and behold, there's a massive river. And I pull out my phone, and I look at the recent weather, and there was a huge thunderstorm last week. That isn't just support for my hypothesis of the river hypothesis, but it also provides support against the someone brought the water here in a big truck. Because under the guise of someone did bring a truck, because someone brought a truck, there isn't a river and it didn't rain, according to my compatriot here. So it's not just supposing that nested hierarchies exist first. It's that they said in the name of their hypothesis, there shouldn't be one there. So then retroactively altering your hypothesis to accommodate such data is not the same thing as having predicted it in the first place using the principles of your hypothesis. Does that check out?
So I guess one last thing I would ask would be, because some models in science would be modified to fit the data. Like, is that the same thing, or is there a difference there?
So you could theoretically do that. That would be the support. Like that would be the appropriate response, is to say, like for instance, with the cyclic universe hypothesis, right? Like that would be like, okay, well, we can't deal with entropy with the second law of thermodynamics. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to alter our hypothesis so that it can. Then you can no longer say that your hypothesis predicted nested hierarchies or whatever, and bring it back to the creationist standpoint, or that data is agnostic to either hypothesis, because evolution did make the prediction that they should exist unilaterally across the board. So altering it is fine. It doesn't make the data agnostic.
Right.
It just is accommodating the data. Like you don't gain a point. It's like if you're thinking of it as a point system, the data is 0 points. Predicting results based off of that data gives you 1 point, and predicting against it that those results won't be a certain way gives you a negative point. Then we're at +1 for evolution and -1 for creation in this stance. Like they don't get to go back and accommodate the hypothesis and say they predicted it all along. They don't.
So, Erica.
So does that mean? Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say. So I guess my question was, if some parts of science are like that, isn't that shouldn't that be not a part of science? Because
it would
kind of confused.
Because in that case, those hypotheses that previously predicted against data and then changed to accommodate them in the future are less robust than the ones that predicted it in the first place.
Yeah. Well, you can modify your model in case there is data that doesn't fit with it. Like for example, a good example is like the Newtonian model of gravitation. It pretty much explained all the motions of the planets, at least most of them. Although there was one planet, I think it was Uranus or Neptune, whose orbit was not did not match exactly what was predicted by Isaac Newton's model. So they proposed that there was another planet beyond it that influences the orbit, and presto, there was another planet discovered. I think Neptune, right? I think, did I the order correctly? First Neptune and then Uranus, right? Neptune. Yes, right.
The way to summarize it, Andrew, would simply to be, when confronted this, would be to point out that accommodating data is not the same thing as making accurate predictions with it. It is a model that simply accommodates the data is inferior to one that can actively make accurate predictions with it and predicted it in the first place. So in the future, if Standing or someone else is like, oh, well, nested hierarchies are agnostic, then you can say, no, in the light of the data that is nested hierarchies, one model predicted them in advance, the other predicted that they would not exist. Changing your model to accommodate it makes it an inferior model because it didn't call for it in the first place. Right. And evolution hasn't had to make some accommodations.
So the likelihood is kind of relative to the models and how they're changed over time, basically. So it's not necessarily one is right, one is wrong. It's just one is more likely than the other because it was able to predict this data, or at least predict the majority of the data over versus just accommodating all of it.
Right. Yes, I think that's a fair way of putting it. And in the sense of nested hierarchies, you could work with the point system of plus and minus one. But the problem is nested hierarchies aren't the only thing that support evolution.
Right.
And what happened with nested hierarchies have indeed happened with so much other data and so many other hypotheses that creationists are like, no, that those can't exist. They won't exist. Transitional forms are a perfect example. Or the irreducible complexity gap that Neslig was talking about earlier, where they say they don't just not predict it, they predict against it, if that makes sense. And then they're dragged kicking and screaming, white knuckling the gravel as they're pulled into accepting that, yes, this thing that you said wouldn't be because of your model is. And then they have to accommodate it.
Yeah,
so
it goes back to like the philosophy of science a bit. Like with anybody can explain anything with enough ad hoc reasoning. Like my explanation works, but there's a problem. Oh well, I just make something up that makes it work. Like you can always do that. Like flat. If you look at flat earthers, for example, they make up really sophisticated excuses for why certain things doesn't match up with their models. Like, if it is flat and the sun stays above the plate of the earth, then why can I not see it when it comes down? It's just like some atmospheric refraction or something like that makes it not visible. But of course, you cannot really account for that still with the other regards.
So
it comes back to like Karl Popper's principle of falsification. Like he was looking at I think it was Freud's psychology. Like his explanation of human psychology was pretty much always ad hoc. Like, why does this person have a problem with something? Because his mother loved him too much. but it appears that this mother was not overbearing in any ways. And then, Freud would then say, like, perhaps this mother didn't love him enough. So you can always flip the story around to explain anything with his idea. So Karl Popper did not like that. He liked more. He liked theories more like Einstein, which made risky predictions that could be falsified. And that's the important thing in science.
Do not let a creationist tell you, Andrew, that nested hierarchies were predicted by creationism.
Right.
Ask for one resource, one that predicted them prior to their kind of inception in general science. Ask, you know what? Just ask for one that's neutral. If you can find a creationist prior to 2005 that is agnostic to the idea of nested hierarchies and think that they can mesh with creationism, not that they support them and that they actively accept that they exist, but just that they could. Ask for one. You won't find one. It has been an incredibly recent development that they have, again, been forced to accept that these nested hierarchies, like transitional fossils, exist. They don't have a choice. It's too evident. And so when you're brought with this, it's agnostic to the worldview, present to them the history of this battle, quote unquote, where creationists have never accepted it. It's been the last decade that they've been forced. Their hand has been forced here, and ask if a great question would be to ask the individual who you're speaking with if you think a model that makes accurate predictions about a phenomenon such as nested hierarchies or the existence of them, or in an unanalyzed lineage, what that might look like, versus one that says they don't exist. When they're shown to exist, which model is inferior? Probe that. Ask about that. Is this so, because I know everyone knows that's who we're talking about because you said it, but he will scream till he's blue in the face that the only thing that matters, the gold standard of science, is testable predictions. Well, boy, that sure does put him in a pickle with nested hierarchies now, doesn't it?
One of the egregious. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say one last thing would be that, like you said earlier, it's testable, accurate predictions. And if in this situation, you have evolution, creation, the creation model, quote unquote. If you're going to say it's right over, or it's more accurate over evolution, it doesn't need to just accommodate the data. It needs to kind of engulf it and explain more of it.
Exactly. And worse yet, remind Standing that creationists were the ones who were saying with definitive confidence that nested hierarchies were not a thing.
Okay. Thanks, Erica.
Okay.
Can I want to make one more regard about the what Erica said about the nested hierarchies. Like now, creationists are like pretending that they always have predicted nested hierarchies. And and also one other example that I really find annoying is like when Jackson Reed debated I don't remember the name from the Reasons to Believe website.
Kevin Anderson?
No, he's an old. Vazorana, yes. And he, like when the topic turned to transitional species, he was like, well, God just created a lot of variety of organisms, and just a few of them happened to look exactly like the transitional fossils that were found. So it's not a problem for creation. Like that. It's like, really? Like after so many times that they asked for transitional species, now they are like, well, it's something that God made.
Well, Fuzz will at least be like, yeah, it looks like evolution. Like he'll at least be like, yeah, that's what it looks like. I mean, but and to Sal's credit, and I know this isn't a Sal friendly channel, but to Sal's credit, even Sal will on certain aspects be like, well, yeah. There's a lot of support. It looks like there's a lot of support for evolution in certain aspects. Sal will propose there's fatal flaws, but he won't deny the support that exists. Other YouTube creationists will bold-faced just say that there's no support. I mean, and it betrays their understanding of the subject very deeply. in my opinion.
I'm not going to comment on your. I'm not going to comment on your cell comment, but I'm going to be dealing with him for quite a while because he is my current favorite thing to pick. But anyway, so we're going to wrap up. But Erica, so did you say we're going to do a thing on proboscideans?
Yeah, I decided that was going to be the bite-sized bust this week today. So I forgot that Walker had done so much work with proboscideans.
Yes, you have not talked to him?
Yeah, Walker, I'll send you a message on Twitter.
I narked you out. I've created a problem.
No, I appreciate it. Walker,
this is his thing, man.
I'm certain he knows more about them than I do.
He's sitting there with a tear in his eye right now, just thinking,
sorry, Walker.
What the fuck? It's like, okay.
So we're saying that Walker truly is the Elephant Man.
He is the Elephant Man.
He is. He is.
Well, he's been wanting to do. He's been threatening to do a video for what about 5 years now? So I don't know. Maybe I exaggerated.
Anytime now.
We can go.
Okay, so can we wrap up, guys, for the day?
Sure.
Great stream. Thank you all.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
No worries.
Yep. Okay, we're going to go undead.
Goodbye, cruel world.
Oh, you did it for me. Thank you.
Keep being curious.
We're ending. We end abruptly.